There we go. All right. Recording, good. Grow the screen, good. View. Come on. Gallery. Perfect. How's everybody?
Doing well.
Doing good?
Good.
Darren, good. Tanya, good. And baby.
Yes.
I just.
Hi. Hi.
Baby.
Mama had to run an errand real quick, so she's with me for a second.
I go to a 12-step meeting 3 days a week, and which is one of the why I have to, be off here by quarter till or so. And anyways, it's so funny. We have people from all over the world: Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Ireland, somebody from England the other day, I think somebody from Germany, and they get in China the other day. Anyways, you'll see cats walking behind them, and you'll see like a tail or the children. There was one mom, and she was sharing, and here comes her little girl. So she's like, okay. Yeah, it was just hilarious to watch them. Okay, questions, thoughts. I was up there last night, I'm sorry, doing responses to y'all. So I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them or questions for the week, anything?
I'd start out with, I told them this, my internet decided to disappear until almost 9 o'clock last night.
Oh my God.
So that's why you didn't see anything on Thursday, and all my responses were so late last night.
You're fine.
So
I haven't been up there tonight. I'm so sorry. Or this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. I realized that my excuse for being late last week was I had company. Well, the company left, and they've come back. So yes. Mm-hmm.
As long as it's warranted company.
Yeah, it's new family. So and they bring 3 little children, and we're not used to 6-year-olds anymore, and they have a lot of energy. And so I just said to Bill, okay, are you ready for this today? We're going to be exhausted tonight, but it's okay. I have a plan. And children's ministry, Tanya, children's ministry it's disastrous for me. I've been called a couple times. I've served early on 2 or 3 times in children's ministry. One thing I learned was after the 3rd time, I really have no business doing children's ministry. Not good. Okay, so
and I tell people that I like the children more than the adults. They're easier. Probably because there's less conflict, but yeah.
I like the teenagers better than the little ones.
Wow.
Yeah, that's.
I sent my son a text, Darren. He's going to tell your son that we're in class together. So
awesome.
Oh, cool.
So our boys are going to the same camp. That's what
I wondered about that. I wondered.
Yep.
You said that. That is so cool.
Yep.
Our son is 35, and he still has does phone calls and different pieces with kids he went to camp with all those years ago. So
me too. I got 4 people I still talk to that I went to camp with, and last time I went to camp with them in 1985.
Wow.
So
no.
This is my first year not going to camp with the middle schoolers. It's kind of weird, but they didn't need as much help with the COVID restrictions up here. So oh well.
This is my first year not doing church camp since 2009. Mm-hmm. So obviously nobody did it last year, but I've been helping out with the church camp since 2009, and I decided to take a year off because of the little one. So
yeah.
So I'm missing it a little bit.
I'll bet. I remember when you came for the first time. It's been fun watching you grow. It really has been. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so what are you thinking? Anything?
I thought the one thing that you didn't list on the difference with the people and all that stuff. Step 1 is realize if you're dealing with someone who just likes to argue.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point.
I know. I've dealt with them. I sometimes can be one. I mean, they're just sometimes, they argue just to argue.
My husband is like that, he's not as bad as he was, but you'd say something and he would just counter it. And
Yeah,
he
I do.
loves the pieces up here. And I think fast on my feet and he doesn't think as quickly. So, and he has to process, but he's in situations where he doesn't have time to process. And so he'll just toss this stuff out. And it's like, hello, this is my area. So yeah, I hate the people who come to board meetings and they'll vote no on something because somebody needs to. I have heard that so many times.
Oh yeah.
You know, people like that. Yeah. I was like, what? No.
We don't have that as much at board meetings, but we have it like when we have a congregational vote. They'll be like, we're going to call a new pastor. I'm going to vote no just because we only had one choice, or because, you know, like someone needs to vote no. And it's like, that's the way it works. Like there's no other options. You're going to get one choice. You're never going to get two. So just vote. But, yeah. And you mentioned board meetings in my discussion. You'd said don't have open discussion.
Yes.
And I think one of the things I was thinking, our board meetings really aren't, they're open, but they're never like, no one ever shows up. Right. So I think it's just more of getting that board together and having them discuss through what should come next, as opposed to like having the entire congregation, because no one ever shows up for a board meeting besides those that are required to vote and the staff. So
that's good. Thank you. You're spot on there. And, you know, just like you're saying, a lot of churches, most churches have that, you know, everybody's welcome, please come. And people don't, unless, oh gosh, Oakland Christian Church, just it's North Columbia. And I was there for probably a year, and Bill did their interim, and I went there specifically around doing their transitional pieces and helping them move around. And there was this couple who had left the church because they just were really ticked off about something, and they left, and their son was still there. And we were amending bylaws. It had come time to do some amending, and form follows function. So don't change your bylaws unless you've been doing things a different way, and that, you know, you can suspend those bylaws and then say, okay, we're going to, good morning, Daniel. And so then you kind of suspend them, or you're doing something and then you say, wow, okay, this isn't really in our guidelines or, you know, our bylaws, but it's working for us. And then you do the processes to, you know, to amend them. Anyways, we were at that point, and the guy, he was the board chair, kept saying, nope, we have to have this many, we have to have that many deacons. And they didn't have that many people.
No.
And the reason was everybody needed to have a voice, so that people like his mother couldn't come in and ramrod things. Okay, so I was coaching this minister in a little town about maybe 15 miles, Hallsville. You guys know that. So they, you know, about maybe 10 miles out of Columbia, and that minister, who was United Methodist, was complaining about this one couple, and they were getting to they had to do bylaw changes, and they were in the back, and they were the only ones, and what would he do? And it just, like, I know things, I have the gift of knowledge. And I said, oh my gosh, I think I know who this couple is. And he said, who do you think they are? And I told him, and he said, how do you know that? I'm like, oh gosh, do not send them back. You know, he's like, well, we've just told him, if you know, you can leave. I said, do not send them back to me. Send them over to Red Top, the Disciples Church in Hallsville. And and the next day, or that Sunday, the husband shows up in church. I called that pastor, you did not send them to me, did you? And so the husband came for about 3 weeks by himself, and then his wife came. And I went to see them you know, I'd been told they wanted to join the church, and I went to see them, and he wasn't there. The wife was there. He may have come in. And I said, I need you to know that we have developed values. We've claimed our values. that we have a covenant, a membership covenant and a leadership covenant. This is our vision and this is the direction we're going in. If you want to be part of that and you're on board with these, we welcome you into membership with open arms. But if you don't like it and you don't want to be part of that, I really want to suggest that you go to see Red Top. And, I tossed a couple of churches out there to them. And she was so mad, but she came and she joined the next week and it became disastrous. They showed up at the board meetings, they complained, just like what their son said. He's codependent, so he just came to their rescue. And at that point, when decisions that were being made with an executive committee came to the board, they were out here and they were just making. So I was on a retreat. I was facilitating a retreat, and my board chair, I was talking to her. There was a decision to be made the next day, and she said, "I don't think we can do that. Because not everybody's on board." I said, 2 people aren't on board. Yes, but, and they're that family. Yes, but, and at that point, I knew I was done. My resignation came the next week. You're on board. So we just have to be careful around those things. Yeah. And then when people do say, well, we never get our voices heard. Well, you have the open invitation to the board meetings. You do have to have a strong board leader, board chair that's able to hold on to, okay, you're welcome to have conversation, or to give input, but here's that. One of the things I've seen done, and I've done in several of the churches I've pastored, is you have the board members around the table and the guests are around the table, right? So it's clear that they're the guest and who the board is.
That's like when we were discussing at board meetings when to go back into the sanctuary after COVID, because we met in our activity center for probably 3 or 4 months and just had chairs spread out in there. And we had several members of the congregation say, why aren't we back in the sanctuary? And I said, well, it's a board decision. And if you want to add your input, come to the board meeting. I never saw those folks in the board meetings, but they always complained that we're still not back in the sanctuary. And I was like, well, there's one way to get back in there is to come in and voice your opinion. But
Yep.
Yeah. I'm really always concerned about the empowerment issue. Again, in another church I served, the one in Bellevue, we had those few people that I've talked about, the 4 couples, and the board chair thought it would be a good idea to do open, I just call them open forum. And what we were doing actually we did little cottage conversations, and we very carefully matched who would be good within the cottage conversation. And the the elders, no, it was the executive committee. So we made sure that there was a good mix, but that we didn't put loud, mean people into that mix so that they could bully, they could what's the word I want, intimidate the other people within the cottage. And the people's, we did them in homes, and the people who hosted, we said you could provide refreshments or not. And again, that executive committee, we practiced the whole piece. And so what they did was come and say, here's where we're heading. And we told them, really, you have a choice. This is what it means to go forward, and this is what it means to go backwards. And those are the only 2 choices. And so we're trying to get some consensus and get a sense from all the congregations. So people were invited specifically, and they were also told, though, if you can't make that or one, or you'd rather go somewhere else, then please do. The hugest mistake we made was to take and do basically an open forum that was in the older folks's Sunday school class, where those couples were, and and let it be open. And some of those people had already been to cottage meetings, but the 6 couple, or 8 couples, that's why we did that, was because they wouldn't go to the cottage things. And it started in, and it just went downhill from there. And then I learned that what we did was we empowered them. What we said was, oh, you have validity. In fact, you have such validity. Let us give you your own private forum, your own private platform. And it did go down from there. And 8 years later, they closed. So that's the hard part, is you go and you put it out there and you say, live or die, basically. And they say they don't like, what it takes, and they end up closing. And I can tell you church after church after church that has done that. I mentioned the military model the other day. So this man who had been career, I think, Air Force, Jim Paget, told me that if you have a recommendation, like you see something going on and you have a suggestion, what you do is you have a problem, you research what you can do with that, and you choose 3 options. And then you take those options to your commanding officer, right? The one who's next up, and you say, this is the problem that, we've been seeing, and these are solutions to that potential solutions. And the one I'd recommend is this one, and this is why. So that they've got some selections, the homework, the background, the study, research has already been done. And then of course the commanding officer gets to make the decision. And in most of our congregations, that board is going to be our commanding officer. So we start with the board chair, always move out. We start with the board chair, executive committee, which is basically the other officers, administrative officers, secretary, vice chair, treasurer. You may have the chair of the elders on there. Usually there are about 5 or 6 people on there. And then when you have consensus here, and a lot of them, right, have favor with the people that are here, and people are on the board, and you talk about who do you have favor with, who do you have influence with, and then they'll talk to the people that are their friends, that they have really have a relationship with, and then they're saying, hey, here's what we're looking at, and what do you think? What question? And I love that. What do you think about that? And so you're getting their feedback, but you're able on that small one-to-one to have conversation, right? Some dialogue about that. And then when you walk into your board meeting, you've got complete consensus going. All questions have been answered, blah, blah, blah. You do want to put it out there though. And again, have an agenda for your meetings and make sure you send that agenda out at least 3 days before, preferably a week before, so people aren't blindsided.
Okay.
Daniel, do you go by Danal? Is that your African name? I can't, there you go.
It's a wrong spelling.
It's a wrong spelling. Okay. Okay.
It's a typo error.
Okay. I have friends who are Chinese, and their name is very different than what their name is.
Okay. So it's still Daniel, not Daniel.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Welcome. Glad to see you.
Thank you. I tried a couple of times, and then I guess I didn't get the timing right. 9 o'clock, I come here every time 9 o'clock in Ohio, and there's nobody here.
Yes.
So like today, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna sit around and check it every hour.
Oh, bless your heart.
So until I was able to discover that, no, 10 o'clock, okay.
You did it.
Let's give it a try. Yeah, I made it today. Thank God.
Oh. Anna is 3 hours from you. So she's Yeah, I did hear from Anna. I don't know if any of you have been in any kind of contact with her. She actually went back to work this week, but is not was not ready to do that. So she was feeling really icky yesterday, really icky. And but she said to send greetings to everybody and thank you for prayers. Uh, yeah,
It didn't look too good last week.
No,
no, she didn't. Um,
There was like she was kind of forcing herself to listen to the lectures and whatever. I was like, oh, what's wrong with this lady?
Yes, she has or had, I guess, pancreatitis, so
Ooh.
inflammation of her pancreas. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'm just surprised she was back at work.
Yeah.
Okay, questions, more questions. Todd.
So in my situation, two of the three that are in my circle, so to speak, in my conflict, they're also members of the board. And one is obviously an officer of the board.
Oh yeah. Oops.
So I I look at that military model and I think, well, do you not invite one of the officers of the board to that initial meeting? That looks suspicious. So that's the only kink that I see in the military plane.
Got it. So what you want to do is take that plan to your board chair. I did say to the board, didn't I? But remember, smaller. So
Okay.
you'll talk about that with the board chair. And as I said, if you have a board chair who's wishy-washy, if you will, afraid to take a stand,
Oh no, not.
not him. Okay, good, good. So when you talk to him, part of that, the model then, and I would think that this, yeah, it has to be part of that. Or, okay, you're talking about here are the pros, here are the cons. This is why I chose this one, or I recommend this one. This is why I recommend, not chose, I'm recommending.
Right.
And here are pros to that, and here are cons to that. And one of my concerns, of course, is that Mary, or which is on the board and the executive committee,
It's
and
Mary.
so there may be some real pushback with that. And then he'll have suggestions about how to get around her,
Mhm.
maybe, or yeah. And if you make a good case for the one you're recommending, and the worst that's going to happen is she's going to act out with that executive committee, but you'll want to talk to her and yeah, probably you and the board chair. Or how big is your executive committee?
We've got our board chair, our vice chair, secretary, treasurer, and then two elders. So
Okay. So I would want to bring the vice chair in. Is he a pretty strong person?
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
He's been with the church forever, and so he's kind of laid back. He's not one that wants to lead much, but he's very knowledgeable in what he does, and he's been the chair before, and so he knows the ropes, so to speak. So
Well, I would definitely take the board chair's lead, what he thinks is best. I do think I might rope the vice chair in, so you've got those pieces, but you'll just, in those cases, what you would say to your executive committee is that we have a proposal about how to address what we understand is we just don't have a policy for, and
Right.
we know that we need to. And so then, and if you can say that pretty close to the meeting, if it's the board
Right.
chair might say, hey, this Sunday we really need to, I want to, can you all be there? It doesn't give the treasurer a whole lot of time, or Mary a whole lot of time to finagle And she won't know what that is even, that you're
Right.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she may, like I say, she may act out, and say, well, blah, blah, blah. And that would be one of the concerns you'd express, I'm not sure how she'll receive this.
And I think she would rather have a policy that she could fall back on. So it's one of those things where she really doesn't have a leg to stand on right here. And neither really because like I said, when we first started this program, it ran itself. And I don't know if they just didn't think about the future because it was running so well, and didn't think, well, we need to have a policy for this.
Right.
And then now, so it really started years ago because we didn't set up a policy because it was going so smooth. And when things go good, we don't think, well, maybe this will go bad later, so we need to put this in place. So now we're kind of stuck with this situation. So
that happens all the time. We don't know there's a problem until there is a problem. And
right.
In smaller congregations without that layer, that's why I suggested the congregations I did for you to look at, because they've got some layer to them.
Right.
Unlike a Salisbury or
Mhm.
a Granville, they don't really have that kind of a layering.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. And people, I mean, we're a church. We don't want to operate like a business. We don't want
Right.
all that stuff. And we have a lot of churches that don't have bylaws or anything. And
Yeah.
you talk about incorporation, they're like, "Ugh, we're a church. Why would we incorporate?" Well, because churches do that in the state of Missouri and Georgia and everywhere else. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was one of the things is our treasurer was like, if we were ever to get audited, this would not fly. And then people are like, we haven't been audited in 35 years. What? And well, we haven't, but what if we were? So I understand both sides of the piece, but
Sure.
And
Yeah.
I had said in there too, one thing I had suggested, one thing our church tries to do, I said every 15, but sometimes it's 20. I mean, but usually it's about every 15 years, we put a committee together and they go through and audit the entire bylaws because of language changes. Because sometimes, you may have written something and then you're like, man, that really is written poorly. And you didn't realize how bad it was. And there's stuff that I'm like, well, like she was even mentioning, that with the last time we amended our bylaws is because we realized that we only needed, because of how the available things like that, we only needed really this many elders, not this many elders, and we only needed this many deacons, not this many deacons. And so we amended the bylaws to say we don't have to have required to have that many of those people. And so things like that seemed relevant when the church was up and running and bigger and everything else. And also it just gets rid of loose language and loose garbage that can gather. So that's just one of the things I said.
Yeah, that's good. And what you're noticing there, churches still today are functioning under what is called the functional committee system. This stuff fascinates me. I really am a church geek. And I'd heard of the functional committee or functional committee structure, but I met this guy who was a contemporary of the man who developed it. This is the history of it. So it's not until the early 1900s that we start to have seated pastors. And Darren, I noticed your quotation marks. You got it. Good job. So it wasn't until the early 1900s or so you start to see more and more seated pastors. But before then, and in smaller congregations, especially that had circuit riding kind of pastors, you might have a pastor one Sunday a month, or maybe 2 Sundays a month, or whatever. When they start to call full-time pastors, okay, so before that, you have elders, right? And elders teach, they're teaching, they can do communion, they're doing everything. They're not really bringing the messages, they're teaching Sunday school. So you'll still find rural churches, even here in Missouri, where you've got Sunday school every other week. And it's that old tradition of elders doing Sunday school, or, that was the message every couple of weeks. So now you've got a full-time minister in there, and conflict really starts to rub. How do they relate? How does that work? And it gets worse and worse. And so this man, Wickheiser, I think it's Carl Wickheiser, who was then what we called a state evangelist. So before we had regional ministers, we had state evangelists. And he was the state evangelist for Iowa. And so what he developed was this functional committee system, and says, okay, for a church to function, you have to have these committees, a worship committee, a this, a that. And elders were always chairs of that worship committee, and they dictated everything, about the worship, basically told the minister, what they would preach on. It was the worship committee that decided, if you had a prayer focus, most of those churches weren't doing Lent, or not Lent or Advent. They wouldn't do Advent, but they would observe that you would have a special prayer focus. They made sure they took care of the spiritual care, the weekly spiritual care of family and members. So you have worship committee, you have to have, I don't know, but you probably have these committees, evangelism committee. You'll see these committees in churches. And so then and then the chairs of these committees become the executive council, or the administrative board, whatever they're called, usually administrative board, so that they all have say. And the board chair is the one that's over that. Then you get this executive committee, which is the minister, the chair of the elders, when you've got vice chairs, whatever, you get all that on, so that they can talk and make some decisions here, but it's checks and balances. So it has to go to the board. And it was how they were trying to work, where congregation was having voice, and the minister had voice as well. They're the ones too that dictated how many deacons and elders. So you'd have 24 deacons and 12 elders. And what happens that really works in those ages when we have larger churches. But now that churches overall, the majority of churches have declined to these little tiny places, we still have functional committee structures, or at least the vestiges of that. We may have changed the language, but you'll see it reflected over and over again. Not all our churches, but many, many of our churches, except for new church plants. You don't see it so much, maybe very often in new church plants. Yeah, so that's how we end up, as Darren's pointing out, we end up with all those deacons and all those elders, and we pull our hair out. You'll go in to do a consultation with a church, and they're saying, we just can't find enough people. We don't have enough people. Yeah, because you're over-structured. You've just got too much structure that's completely irrelevant. And in this day and age, an evangelism committee, that is not enough. That does not make sense. We've got to teach people how to be sharing their faith, right? Or sharing their faith, whatever that means within our context and setting, right? How are we all within who we are within, again, the context of our congregation? How are we preparing people to be evangelists? And sometimes being an evangelist, if you're not able to do those deeper parts of of evangelism, I said over and over again, you can surely invite somebody to come to worship or Sunday school or to something with you where they can hear the good news. You may not feel comfortable sharing the good news, but bring them, invite them to where they can hear it.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we get so focused on trying to spread the gospel and we I don't want to say we try to push people into church, but we tell them, and there's so much more about forming a relationship before you can't just go and Bible thump and say if you're not in church you're doing the wrong thing, and you can't force Jesus into people's face, because the more that you try to push people into church, the more we kind of push them out of church unknowingly. You got to form those relationships first, and that's what's key, and that's where we lose a lot of people is why aren't you in church? But I'm not making an effort to be your friend first, and that's the same thing with God. If we're not forming a relationship with God, then how do we expect him, God, why weren't you here for this and that? It's because we're not he's there, we just don't see it because our eyes is on something else. So all about relationship.
Herb Miller, who was a disciples minister, he's passed on in the last few years, with, I don't know, last 5 years or so, I think it is. He's the one who founded Net Results magazine. And if you're not getting Net Results, please contact my Bill or me, because all the seminary students, and you all are seminary students, Phillips students, get free subscriptions to Net Results magazine. And it is incredible. When we became disciples, or not when we were getting ready to be ordained, I asked one of our mentors, what do I need to know as a disciples minister? And there were a group of saying there, said 3 things: go to regional assemblies and show up for your regional general assemblies. Go to, it was then called the National Evangelism Workshop, and it was always held for anywhere from 2 to 3 or 4 days before General Assembly. So they said, go to regional and general assemblies, go to National Evangelism Workshop, and read Net Results magazine. And we took them seriously. And today, Bill's the publisher and editor of Net Results. They'd had a couple different editors, and the last one, I won't tell you who it is, but it's a major consulting firm for churches. And they approached, I don't remember her name now, but she had been for years Herb Miller's assistant. And so as Herb stepped back out of ministry, she became the one that was running it. And she didn't feel comfortable with them. And so she came to the Effective Church Group and asked Bill if he would take over the magazine, and they gave it to us. So it has articles like you can't believe, and it's amazing. And what we were taught to do, it's all digital now. You cannot afford to do things print and mailing anymore. But what we were taught is to take out the sections that will be helpful to your, like to a team leader or something. So say it was about evangelism, you would pull out the stuff that was specifically about that and give it. But I'm not sure what the current issue is anymore. It may be about hospitality and how to greet your folks into that. And I forgot why I went on that tangent. So Net Results. The other thing, if you're not watching Church Talk, that's the weekly program that Bill and I do. It's live every Thursday. And what live means is because we tape it ahead of time so we can edit it, but we're there on chat. So if you watch it, we'll on Thursday, we're there on chat. So if you have questions as it's going along, but it's on Thursdays at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock Central Ohio or Eastern Ohio time. And if you go to Church Talk, CHURCHTALK, churchtalk.tv, then you can watch it. You can watch past episodes. And most recently, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago, we have guests every other week. So we've had someone talking about how to network. You know, how do you go out as a church leader or pastor? How do you meet people? Where do you go? Another one, and again, this one was probably about 3-4 weeks ago, was about how to get visitor information. And then we followed up this past week. It was about what do you do with that visitor information? You know, how do you do guest visitor, follow up? And I think that's what this issue of Net Results is about, is guest follow up. And it's all these different opinions. So he has all these different people from across the country that are writing from different perspectives and different specialties. So yeah, if you have Bill's email, you can send it to him, or if you want to send it to me, I'm glad to take care of that with you. Yeah. So a couple, I think they're just, if I say so myself, excellent resources. And Church Talk, it depends. But we try to, it doesn't go longer than 15 minutes. They're usually 10, 12, up to 15 minutes. So they're real short. And I don't know, if I say so myself, it's great stuff. If you don't think so, you can tell me.